As Vaughn said, I'm Phil Lelyveld. I've spent the last little over a year now building the Consumer 3D Experience Lab at USC's film school. And there we focus on 3D to the home, to personal devices, to public spaces, to advertising, and theatrical. So running through, think of this as 3D 101, all aspects of 3D. So for starters, how do we see 3D? If you put your finger in front of your face, your eyes, both of your eyes are converging where your finger is, and they're focusing at the distance to your finger. In 3D movies, you're using two images, one's left eye, one's right eye, to simulate a virtual position for your finger. It could be in front of the screen, it could be behind the screen, it could be on the screen. But while it's moving from behind the screen to moving in front of it, your eyes are converging on that virtual space, but it is always in focus on the surface of the screen. There's a disconnect between where your eyes converge and where they focus. And if you don't manage that disconnect very well, you can induce headaches, nausea, and other things. So essentially, it's one of the first art forms that actually has a physiological impact on you. It can impact your health, and that needs to be managed very carefully. A second aspect to 3D movies is in the real world, when you look at a rectangle, some artwork on the wall, if you stand off to the side, there are visual cues around you that your brain knows how to process to say, hey, I'm off axis, I need to correct for that. In 3D movies, there is no visual cue in the basic physics of viewing 3D. So if you look at a 3D movie off to the side, you're just going to see a distorted 3D image. So the bottom line and the takeaway I like to put at this point is, if you remember nothing else from this talk, remember that the best seat in a movie theater is about 1.5 screen heights back in the middle. If you're up closer, an object that's supposed to be a ball from that sweet spot, up closer to the screen is going to be flat. If you're further back, that ball is going to be elongated like a football. If you're off to the side, you're going to get that distortion because you're off axis. So essentially, you want that best seat. That's what they should be charging the most for, and they should actually pay you to sit front left or front right, because that's painful and you're getting a bad experience. All right, 3D content creation. There are just basically three ways of creating it. You can shoot live action, you can generate it on a computer, or you can shoot something in 2D and then convert it to 3D, or go to your archive and take something old and transition it to 3D. On the live action side, essentially, you've just got two cameras linked together in some way so that you're able to capture your left eye and the right eye with a single shot. There are various models out there, but they've pretty much worked out the physics of making sure that they are aligned and working properly. In terms of shooting live action, you have to get everything right live. Think about how you would swoop around a stadium or cut from camera to camera. You don't want to whiplash people's eyes. So they're developing software now that brings a whole suite of cameras to a neutral place when you're about to cut, so that a cut from camera 1 to camera 3 has a smooth transition. There's a lot about this that's being worked out now. The key point I want to make now versus in a couple of slides is just that for live action, everything has to be right while it's going on. In pre-recorded, like for a movie, you can fix everything in post. But live action has to be right, and they're working hard to develop those tools, which will then transition into post. Computer generated, obviously everything is going to be aligned because you're basically defining in the computer software where the left eye and the right eye image should be. So you're just asking the computer to generate two eyes. Computer-generated imagery is really important. The important difference between a computer-generated movie and a computer-generated game is that movies, television shows, they're essentially pre-recorded and they're sent to you, and you have to view them the way the director or the stereographer intended you to view them. For games, it's generating that 3D effect on the fly. And games that are optimized for 3D, like in this case Invincible Tiger, actually have a scroll bar menu in them so that if you're sensitive to 3D, you can tone it down all the way down to 2D. If you like a lot of 3D, you can take it up actually beyond pain. I'll get to that in a little while. And you can control it. So that's a key difference between games and pre-recorded content. Emerging technologies, which are not going to be on the market for a couple of years, but which have been demonstrated, will allow you to adjust the 3D aspect of a pre-recorded movie or television show down if you're sensitive to 3D. You just can't make it any greater than what they send you. That's coming. 2D to 3D conversion. Essentially, think of this as rotoscoping every single object within every single frame and determining where in the depth space you want to position them. There are computer chips that will do that on the fly, but until we have absolutely perfect artificial intelligence, they're going to make mistakes because they don't make judgment calls. They just look at the frame they're in, the frame before it, and the frame after it, and say, oh, this should be at this depth, which is why you need human intervention for Hollywood quality 2D to 3D conversion. If any of you went to the Consumer Electronics Show this year, there are some manufacturers selling television sets with that chip built into them, and they're marketing them as you can watch all your television in 3D. Well, from my experience, it's interesting, but after about 5 minutes, you start noticing all the mistakes instead of what it's doing right. And so I would hold off on buying those sets for a while without naming names. In terms of the cost, the impact of all this on the budget, for animation, as I said before, because it's just generating a second eye in the process of creating the 3D animation, computer-generated animation, it only adds about 8% of the budget. The real hit comes with live action, and that's not in the shooting, that's almost entirely in the post-production. Because remember, you're shooting it with 2 cameras. Those cameras might have really minor defects in the lens or the way they capture light, or there might be on the chips in the 2 cameras that are capturing the light slight differences in how they capture red versus blue versus green or whatever. That all has to be corrected out because slight differences in color between the left eye and the right eye, or brightness, or if they're slightly tilted one versus the other, those can induce headaches and other things, and so that has to be corrected out. Plus, in post-production, if you don't like the depth, the way it was shot, you can fix it. But that explains why it adds 15 to 25% to the budget, because you can do manipulation of that 3D image. 2D to 3D conversion currently costs $40,000 a minute and up, not down, for Hollywood quality experiences. As I mentioned before, the computer can do the first pass automatically. Then you need human intervention. What we have found so far is that if you start pricing that work as a contractor below about that threshold, you start getting errors which again catch up with you, and you're diminishing the, let's in quotes, Hollywood quality experience that we want to get out there. So this price will come down, and we'll see how this process speeds up as movies like Clash of the Titans come out, which had 10 weeks to convert an entire movie from 2D to 3D. If that looks good, that might start driving production time down and reduce costs, but that's going to be a real bellwether, whether it succeeds or not. But the key point there again is that 2D to 3D costs so much that you can't just go into your library and say, I want to convert everything to 3D. You have to figure out the business model and determine which ones you might have a chance at this point of having a theatrical release, which is where you're going to make a lot of your first money back on for that conversion. Okay. The emerging language of 3D, which I've touched on a little. There's a whole new profession emerging called the stereographer. Think of it as the cinematographer who's dealing in the depth of the image. And the leaders in that field like to say that they plan out their stereo for the entire movie in pre-production. The reality is they think about it, but then when production starts up, it all gets put aside, and I've been told it all happens in post. So you can plan out your 3D ahead of time while it's going on and experiment, or do it in post, and a lot of it right now is happening in post. Now, planning it out. This is a single scene from the movie Coraline, where time is moving from left to right, and the blue line represents the furthest image from the audience. The orange line represents the closest thing from the audience. So think of this as the equivalent of a movie score or a storyboard. You can see they're trying to maintain a fairly equal distance from front to back over most of that, because your eyes can adjust to that distance and just hold it so you're not getting any health effects from the 3D experience. In the middle, Coraline is jabbing her hand out for a second, which you can do briefly, and it becomes, a nice effect, and it adds to the storytelling. If she held her hand out for a long period of time, it just happens based on that scale that would induce pain. By the time you focus on her hand is gone, and that's why it works for that scene in this movie. But the whole concept of a depth script is something that's emerging. There are a number of fundamental questions that are starting to be asked. The key one for all involved in the production of 3D content is, what is the largest probable screen size you're going to show what you're shooting on? If you think about how you create that 3D effect, which is you have two images on the screen, one is your left eye image and one is the right eye image. If you shot it for television and said, oh, this is cool, I want to see it on the big screen, suddenly when you blow it up from the television to the 40-foot movie screen, you're asking people's eyes to point outward, which is painful and unnatural. So if you think you're going to show it on a movie screen, plan for that. When the image shrinks down, the depth gets shallower and things get flatter within it. And you can correct that out. It's much harder and much more costly to try and bring everything together if you go from small to large. So keep that in mind. There are a number of other things to consider that I'm not going to go into. Well, one key one is, what do you do with subtitles, graphics, closed caption? A number of groups are working on that. What seems to be emerging is closed caption and titles are going to be slightly in front of the closest object in any given scene. The end game from the creative side is that 3D needs to transition from a special effect to part of the storyteller's toolkit. When you stop noticing the movie is in 3D, then it will have succeeded. And I like to think of 3D as a theatrical space with edits. What Avatar did so beautifully is it put most of the 3D behind the surface of the screen. You were looking into a shoebox world of different planet, but he edited it so well that you got a richer sense. And he also had he and prior to that used 3D so effectively that the whole health side of things, where people were complaining about headaches, went way down statistically than previous releases. So something else to keep in mind. And just as in the early days of movies, where the first audiences, when a train came at them, they jumped out of their seats and got out of the way, people are now learning how to see 3D. And as people learn how to see 3D, we're going to have to increase we'll be able to increase how it's used as an artistic art resource. But right now it has to be used very carefully. And speaking of that, let me just double back to games. I want to make the point that the most successful 3D games are probably going to be children's games and Quest games, at least first generation, because they move your head and your eyes around slowly. First-person shooters that really whip you around and jump from scene to scene not only can give you incredible headaches, but they have yet to figure out how to make the 3D effect actually add to the gameplay experience. Whereas slow Quest games, and as I said, children's games, the 3D actually adds a creative element to the gameplay process. And that's part of learning how to see 3D. As those kids get older, they'll be able to move their eyes faster in a 3D experience, and it'll all move forward. Okay, 3D in movie theaters. It's no secret that we're in the middle of this explosion of the release of 3D content. The question is, why is it now, and why do we think it's going to succeed now? And my thesis is that it all has to do with the analog to digital transition, and 3D is really just an unintended consequence of everybody wanted to convert over to digital production. So now that we can create content digitally, process it digitally, distribute it digitally, and display it digitally, suddenly film cameras, which were used in the past for 3D, have been changed over to digital. They don't vibrate out of alignment, and the misalignment was a major cause of headaches. You can process out the imbalance between the two images digitally, which was much harder on film. And on the display side, digital projections, again, the projectors are not vibrating out of alignment. So it just happens that 3D has benefited from this, not to mention the potential economic impact and the ability to upsell a 3D ticket from a 2D ticket. Currently, speaking of that, there are about 9,000 3D screens worldwide, and 3,900 in the United States. 11 countries have over 100 screens, and there's a hope that by the end of this year there'll be about 7,000, 5,000 to 7,000 in the US. Now, that's still really problematic, because when you think of how movies are released, they're held in theaters basically until the theater chain decides it's not making any money for me and they want to kick it out. But because there haven't been enough 3D screens in there, and multiplexes usually only have one or two, once a new 3D movie comes, they have to kick the old one out. It might be before the economics say, hey, it's time to leave. And the perfect example is this weekend, because Alice in Wonderland was number 3 at the box office 3 weeks in a row, and now suddenly How to Train Your Dragon is out there. And it'll be interesting to see how many theaters decide, I want the new movie versus I think there's a lot of life left in the old movie. But the key problem is major releases release on about 3,000 screens. In North America, there are 3,900 3D screens. In a week from now, Clash of the Titan comes out. You know, a lot of money is going to be left on the table until they build out the infrastructure. So there is a definite will, both on the studio side and on the theater side and on the financial industry side, to build this out. This Chase, JP Morgan Chase deal for funding another 4,000 screens in North America with these 3 chains actually was announced a year ago, but it was, I think, re-announced in February. And hopefully that'll get rolling so that we don't have this movies stepping on each other's toes situation going on much longer. Because last summer when Monsters vs. Aliens came out, the number of 3D screens were on the order of 20 to 30%, but they accounted for, well, as you can see, between 40 and 60% of the gross. So clearly people are voting with their feet to go see it in 3D. Similarly, Avatar, the numbers on this table are from January, but the final gross so far is that 85% of the revenue came from 3D screens worldwide. So there is definitely a push to move, to convert 2D screens to 3D screens. Jumping to the technology for a second, there are currently 4 technologies worldwide in movie theaters. The one in the upper left, Real D, is probably the one most of you have experienced because they've got 90% of the US market. But globally, it's a battle between all 4 of those. From a filmmaker perspective, you don't care. It's not going to impact what you shoot or how you handle it in post-production. It only impacts how they prepare the final digital file for exhibition. They have to create one version for each of these 4 technologies, but that's not the filmmaker's concern. And if you notice also, all of the glasses are clear, all right? We're not dealing with anaglyph, no red, blue, or red, green glasses here. They do tint, they have a slight tint to them. So 3D movies at the moment have a lower light level projected onto the screen and a lower light level that comes to your eyes. And you probably want to take that into account when you're doing your color timing and other things, or theatrical release. Some questions this raises from the theater owner perspective are, which system do you buy? Does the consumer need to know? I just happen to know that my theater in Culver City uses the Dolby system, but the one in Century City uses the Real D system. I don't know if that would make me choose a different theater or not, but the question is, do you start advertising that? Real D definitely puts their logo in lots of movie ads. And how will this difference in systems impact the adoption of 3D TV? On the, let's say, looking back into the future side, because there are only 3,900 out of 39,000 theaters in the United States, or screens in the United States, that have digital projection or 3D projection, what about all those film theaters? And I just want to throw this up for a second, because there are at least 2 technologies out there now saying, hey, we've got a really inexpensive way of allowing you to use film but still project 3D. And I will be honest, they both work very well, but they raise a number of issues. Mainly, what ticket price do you charge, okay? Because is that a digital projection or not? Do you want to call that a branded 3D experience or not? Because film does scratch, film does get dirty, which is one of the key differentiators for the digital transition. And basically, if this were a workshop, we could have a discussion. So, moving on. The consumer market side of 3D. There are 5 technologies out there that are available to the consumer for viewing 3D, and I'll cut to the chase. Only 2 of them are ones you care about right now. So, for starters, anaglyph is the old-fashioned one, and while there have been a few movies and concert films released with anaglyph glasses, 4 or 5 pairs in the clamshell, so that you could watch them in 3D. If you've watched any of these with a critical eye, you notice that it uses the 2 colors in the glasses to create the 3D effect. So it effectively extracts those colors from the movie. So if you're wearing those glasses and watching the movie, you're seeing a movie that's almost black and white, but kind of yellow, but it's definitely in 3D, which is why every release I've seen that was released with those glasses also comes with a 2D version. Because when you're tired of wearing the glasses and you're tired of getting the headaches because your eyes are getting 2 different color fields, you can transition over to the 2D version. Second type is passive polarized. And what's happening here is there is a thin film on the surface of a standard HD television set with some tricky electronics inside that is rotating the light that comes from every other line on that screen clockwise for one eye, and the alternating every other line counterclockwise. All right, so effectively you're looking at a slightly reduced resolution screen, but it is giving you a 3D image. The television costs more, but the glasses wholesale for 50 cents. And keep that in mind, because I'm now jumping to the next one, which is active shutter. And this is pretty much what you're seeing advertised from all the vendors here in the United States. What's going on here is that the screen is alternating left eye, right eye image really fast at 120 times per second or 240 times per second. Somewhere in the screen or around the screen, there is an emitter that is sending a signal to the glasses that come with it, hopefully. And when the screen is showing the left eye, the lens on the glasses for the right eye goes black. When the screen is showing the right eye, the lens for the left eye goes black. They're essentially single crystal displays, one for each eye, liquid crystal displays. It'll be interesting. There are differences in the technology and the designs for those shutter glasses. The key takeaway here is the set is not going to cost much more than a standard HD television set. The glasses have been announced, depending on the vendor, for between $150 and $200 per pair. that price is going to come down because there's already a third party that's saying, I'm going to create glasses for $125, and so expect it to come down. But there's also an issue of if you buy a Samsung set and your neighbors have a Panasonic set, will the glasses work when they come over? And the third-party vendors are working on universal glasses that work with all the technologies. Right now, Samsung has announced our sets only work with our glasses and vice versa. So we'll see how long that lasts. But working on that relationship is something that standards bodies and associations are currently involved in discussions on because they want to standardize that. Okay, just as a reminder, this television set is not going to cost a whole lot more, but figure the whole bundle because the glasses cost a lot. The polarized ones, when they come out in the United States, date unknown, the set may cost more than this, but the glasses are going to be really cheap unless you go with designer glasses, and there are already designer glasses on the market for both of these. Okay. The fourth technology is head-mounted displays, and in this case, you're wearing actually, that's like a Star Trek version, but you can find them, they look like sunglasses, really, black sunglasses. And in each of the lenses, there is a little screen with lenses on top of it, so you're getting your own personal 3D movie. And they work really well. They've been selling them in Sky Mall, if you've taken a flight, for the last 4 or 5 years because they work perfectly fine with 2D movies. But now they're being marketed for 3D movies, and to the gamer community because at the low end, which start at about $100, they come with the screens inside plus earpieces. As they go up in price, they get motion sensors so the game turns when you turn your head. And the most expensive ones have little cameras in the front of them so you can do augmented reality. So you can walk around the world and see the world but also see things imposed on it. So and they're actually kind of cool. All right, and the fifth type, which everybody says is the end game for all of this, for the consumer market, are auto-stereoscopic television sets. And basically that just means television sets where you don't need glasses to see 3D. These work by having another film on the surface, but in this case the film is directing behind each element in that film are 2 pixels. One has the image for your left eye and one has the image for your right eye. If you're standing in the right position, you will see 3D. And the right position means a pie shape coming out from the screen, or actually many pie shapes, because these can have 21 little pies around or 3 broad pies. But the point there is if you're in between that sweet spot, in between that pie triangle, it goes funky because it doesn't know which eye to send each of the left eye and the right eye to. So until that gets worked out, and they are working on that, this is perfect for public spaces because when you watch this glasses-free 3D as you walk by, it really catches your eye because things jump out at you. Not for the home, but maybe for laptops, cell phones, and personal devices because they're single-user devices, and if you're just looking at it, you will always naturally hold it in the right position. I think 2 days ago, Nintendo announced the 3DS, which is their next generation game player, handheld game device, and it's called 3DS because it's going to be 3D. And there's been a lot of silly talk out there about it'll have to have some head tracking device in order to know where your 2 eyes are. The reality is it's got this type of surface on it and nobody knows. I'm just assuming, since they want to keep the price down, it's going to have this type of film on it and you'll just tilt it until you see the 3D. And there's quite a bit of play in that tilting, so it's not as if you have to stand perfectly still while you're playing that. So that's the fifth type. So just as a quick review, the anaglyph is the 2-color, that's the 1950s style, and we're not encouraging that. Passive polarized, more expensive television set, really cheap glasses. Active shutter, that's the one you're going to be seeing in all the stores now and over the summer. Head-mounted displays for gamers primarily, but also in the space, and auto-stereoscopic, probably for advertising. Getting into the whole 3D market now, again, things to think about. What does the sales associate say when someone comes in and says, I bought an HD TV 2 years ago, I'm looking at this 3D, tell me about it. What's the answer? Okay, Consumer Electronics on March 12th came out with a list of 7 things to know about 3D. The key takeaway here that I want you to remember is a 3D set is just an HD television set with an enhancement. When it's not showing 3D, it's a perfectly fine HD television set. So it's not a choice between the two. If you're looking to buy a new set, you might as well just buy this enhancement so that you're future-proofing your purchase. Okay, the technical side. And technical side has impact on the whole business of 3D. And this is why. There are 2 ways of sending a 3D signal, whether it's on a DVD or Blu-ray disc or over the air or any other method. You can either fit the 2 images, the left eye and the right eye image, into the frame of an HD TV rectangle, and that's called frame compatible because it's compatible with the HD signal. Or you can say you're going to send full left eye and full right eye image, in which case you're sending the full left eye in that HDTV rectangle, but you're sending everything you need to know about reforming the right eye in metadata. Okay? If you're going frame compatible, where you're squeezing the left eye and the right eye, it could be one on top, one over the other, it could be one to the left and one to the right, it could be interlaced or some other way. When you're doing that, you're losing a little resolution, like over, under, you're losing some vertical resolution because you're squeezing it. But from a distribution standpoint, that can be done in the existing distribution plant. ABC, Comcast, even internets like Amazon, if they've got 3D distribution, don't have to retool, don't have to buy new equipment. It just works that way. But the consumer needs to have a decoder at their end, otherwise they're going to see 2 images, top and bottom, right and left. So in that case, the expense has been shifted over to the consumer, but that cost may be minimal. Or as a friend of mine says, de minimis, in the long-term implementation. One of the key selling points of Blu-ray is that it's giving you the full left eye, full right eye. So they're using that lower technology. If you broadcast that lower technology, and let me put that in 2 pieces. The infrastructure right now for distributing, whether it's over-the-air, satellite, or cable, is not equipped for that format, for the left eye plus metadata. So they have to do a complete retooling to get that out to you, which is why Blu-ray is selling itself right now as the only true 3D, because they're giving you full left eye, right eye. If Comcast and whatever retooled and sent that, it would work on your existing HDTV because it would see the left eye and would show you the left eye. It would see that metadata and say, I don't know what this is, I'm throwing it out. So that is compatible with existing consumer electronics, but it shifts a huge cost upstream. So when you go to buy your Blu-ray player, if you choose to, it's going to come with a special player, a special cable, and some special software inside that will allow you to reconstruct that full left eye, right eye on the 3D screen that you get. A real question which has not been tested is, can the average consumer see the difference between that full left eye, full right eye, and that slightly reduced left eye, right eye from the top one? Blu-ray is betting that consumers will see the difference. We'll know in the next few months whether that's the case or if it's primarily a market-driven differentiation that people buy simply because it's trendy. Okay? There are multiple standards bodies working on 3D, smoothing out a lot of things because you want to hide all this from the consumer. Forget all this. The key takeaway here is that market power and strategic alliances are going to decide what wins out. Essentially, in any emerging technology, market forces decides what is the best solution, and then standards bodies adopt it. So while all those standards bodies are talking about this, in the end, whoever wins is going to set what gets out there in the marketplace, and they'll just adopt, standards bodies will just adopt what comes up. Which leads us very briefly to the concept of there's a lot of jostling out there about who owns what patents, because there's a lot of intellectual property and potential royalty at play here, which will drive what technologies get accepted, because some of those encoding formats for that frame-compatible stuff are public domain, and some of them have royalties associated with them. So people might decide, well, they're about the same, I'm going with the one that's free. All right, I've already talked that I work at USC. One of the goals of our center is really to facilitate the convergence of ideas, because a real concern is that consumers get a consistent, enjoyable purchasing as well as viewing experience. As I mentioned a second ago, consumers need to have someone there who can advise them in terms of the differences, or else they're just going to walk out the door. Or if the remote or interface is too confusing, you're going to lose them. So we're working to try and simplify that whole process. From a research and, let's see, just issues to consider. Okay, mention the fact that you want to author for the biggest possible screen. An unresolved question, which is currently a very hot topic in Hollywood, is, okay, I've shot, and speaking strictly of movies, I shot the movie for the big screen. When I want to distribute it to the consumer, do I reauthor it? Or do I just send them the left eye and the right eye from the theatrical release and say, it's okay, you won't mind that it doesn't have the depth and it's a little flatter? Some studios have decided on the few releases that are out there that that's what they're going to do. Others are studying the issue, because the question is, if you do reauthor it, do you reauthor it once for the consumer market? Do you reauthor it twice, once for a big screen and once for cell phones, and let consumers decide which one they want to watch at any given moment? Or are there intermediate reauthoring points? It's an unresolved issue, and it's something that we're looking at in terms of running tests on it. Okay, which brings me briefly to the health and public policy side of 3D. It turns out that we know that 4% of the population are stereo blind. That means that either their eyes point in different directions or their eye-brain connection never developed, and they compensate in the real world by moving their head left to right and seeing relationships between objects. They tend not to play sports and other things where things are being thrown at their head. And they've learned in the real world, they just live with it. Then they go into a 3D movie and or a game or whatever, and they say, what's the big deal? It looks the same to me. And some of these people just happen to have been active bloggers, and they blogged the 3D sucks, and it turns out they were stereo blind. And so wouldn't it make a lot of sense to have a simple test that people can do a self-test on to see how their vision works when it comes to a 3D environment? And it turns out optometry has a simple test. It's called RANDOT, which is short for random dots. And you look at a pattern, and you put the glasses on and look at the pattern, and if you see something come out of it, you can see 3D. If you don't see something come out of it, it does not mean you will not enjoy the movie or that you do not see stereo. It just means you have an issue, and look into it. Don't blame it on the movie or whatever. And one thing that we're pushing, and I'm involving marketing and biz dev people and PR people in this discussion, is, doesn't it make sense to put that as a poster in a movie theater lobby or in the menu of a consumer electronics device or in the menu of a DVD, and in the privacy of your home or all by yourself, just tell people, hey, look at this, just to make sure before you walk out the store with this big 3D TV, to make sure that you can see 3D. And that's one thing that, like I said, we're advocating. On a more research side, we're very concerned about the comfort and the fatigue factor of viewing 3D. It turns out, I've got a page of about 30 different factors that can impact that. But the issue there is there are people who are getting headaches and nauseous and whatever from viewing 3D content. Why that happens has been known for decades, because those people have other problems. They go see their optometrist, and studies have been published in terms of what the problem is and how to fix it. What has never been done, and what we're working on, is a mass population study to figure out what percentage of the population has which visual problems, and how do those problems evolve over time if someone is exposed to 3D over time. Because viewing 3D is a learned experience. Your muscles learn how to relax, to differentiate from where they converge to where they focus. So it could be that 3D could actually be beneficial, but we just don't know. And so I'm working on getting large population studies, because you don't want public policy made based on anecdotes. You don't want someone coming in saying, I get a headache, therefore you need a warning label, which has been discussed in the EU and in Australia and now in Italy. We're trying to inform that debate, both while you're looking at the 3D content and after the fact over time. Okay, because that has led to some silly stuff. And I know you can't really read this, but we can read that one, where Sony came out, and this is actually really cool. I love this. Their latest 3D television set, the high-end one, has intelligent presence sensor, which can recognize the body of a small child versus the body of a dog or a person. And if it gets within 1 meter, it turns off the television set. Because remember, if you're up too close to a 3D image, your eyes might diverge. And that is a danger. And so this is a safeguard against that. But I love this one, because this is from the Samsung television set safety manual, where it says, when watching 3D pictures, ensure you do not place any object that is harmful or can easily be broken near you. Being startled or deluding yourself into thinking that the 3D images are real may cause you to crush a nearby object or get injured trying to move your body. Like I said, there's no data. They're winging it, you know, and they're basically trying to cover themselves. But we're helping to get that straightened out. All right, market research. Okay, what is the impact of having a personal experience? We did a study 2 years ago. Okay, this is December of 2008. The USA Entertainment Technology Center and the Consumer Electronics Association jointly did a study of consumers' attitudes towards 3D. And remember I said it's an unintended consequence of this conversion from analog to digital? What we saw in this survey, and the real thing to look at is just that the green line is longer than the other two. The green line represents people who saw at that time a 3D movie in the last 12 months or so. And the key takeaway is, for the first time in history, people who saw 3D said, that was kind of cool, I want to do it again. Back in the 50s or the 30s or the 70s or the 80s, when similar studies were done, it was like, that's cool, I'll see you in a decade. And now there's more of an interest in doing it over and over again, or again anyway, which led us to another, okay, and they voted with their feet, because this shows attitudes. The behavior is when the same movie is showing in a Cineplex on a 3D screen and a 2D screen, the 3D sells 2.4 times more tickets than the 2D. Okay. So we did another study this year, and what we found, this study was on, okay, what are your attitudes towards 3D TV? And what we found was that 25% of those surveyed said that they would be interested in buying a 3D television set within the next 3 years. And again, that represents attitude. We don't know if they actually buy it, but, the key takeaway is that, it's the middle one. The key takeaway is that this mirrors where HD TV was at the same point in its commercial life cycle. So things look good for it. Consumers say they're willing to pay a 15 to 25% premium, which, as I said, remember, when you add in the glasses, if those glasses prices don't come down, it's probably going to be a little more. And the prospective buyers skewed young, which makes a lot of sense because most of the content has been for a younger audience. And just to reinforce that, last summer, Prime Research did a study over in Germany, and what they found was that 70% of 14 to 19-year-olds were willing to pay a higher ticket price for a 3D movie, but only 30% of 60-pluses were. Again, that's the youth skew. Market scenarios. All right, really the only point I wanted to make here was when it comes to projections, you might read in the newspaper somebody says 3D is going to be this, some huge number in 3 years. I just stress what I like about this specific study is that they give you a high and a low. If things come together in that optimistic view where things get standardized and consumers aren't confused when they walk in the store, then they're giving you a trend of where we'll head. If standardization doesn't occur, if your Samsung glasses don't work with your Panasonic television that your neighbor has, then that's really going to be an impediment. So it's just nice to have a top and a bottom when it comes to projections. All right, recent events. So, although you've read that a dozen major movies are coming out this year in 3D, it turns out that over 50 have been announced for theatrical release this year. Now, some of those are going to be just IMAX, some of them are only going to be special screenings, but they have everyone on this list, and I hope this is up to date, has been announced as a 3D release. In terms of broadcast announcements, and these come one a day, it seems, at least, you've got golf, you've got basketball, you've got the World Cup, you've got Major League Baseball. It's not just the U.S., you've got Spain, Germany, UK, Ireland. Over in Japan, NHK has been doing 2 hours of 3D broadcasts 5 nights a week for the last year and a half. So a lot is happening on the distribution space in terms of broadcast cable and satellite. In terms of bundling deals, remember I mentioned for the red-blue glasses, the anaglyph stuff, a lot of the movies that have been released for that, like the Miley Cyrus movie, have been, let's say, the B-level movies as opposed to the A's. The studios have been holding out their A levels not just because they want consumers to adopt this new technology, but also because it's a bundling opportunity for them. And so Samsung has partnered with DreamWorks. When you buy the Samsung bundle of hardware, you're also going to get the Monsters vs. Aliens in 3D before it hits the street, plus, I guess, a coupon, because they're converting all 4 Shrek movies to 3D by the end of this year. Panasonic has a similar deal with Fox. I mentioned LG and Sky, where Sky is doing that pubs and clubs thing. Sony has not announced in terms of their movies where they're partnering with yet, but we expect something soon. So that's another aspect of this 3D conversion. Interesting. Walmart is going to start selling 3Ds this Christmas season. What's interesting about that, as the bullet says, is that they usually wait until there's household penetration before introducing a new consumer electronics product line. But they've just decided there's so much buzz around 3D, they're going to start selling it this Christmas season. And I mentioned the Nintendo thing before, where Nintendo was coming up with essentially a handheld game player that is in 3D. Okay, and there are multiple types of 3D content, obviously coming down the pike: movies, live events, augmented reality, sports, gaming, concerts, lots of concerts. Live Nation has announced, I think, 60 concerts this year that they're going to record and live broadcast into other venues, theaters, over the course of this year. They're not going to send it to the home, but they are going to release 3D releases of those concerts later on. And also, there's a growing do-it-yourself 3D movement. On YouTube, you can actually find instructions on how to do 3D. And what's most interesting about this is where the arrow is pointing. That is a pull-down menu where you can tell them, or you can actually select which 3D encoding format you're using. So one of the options there is side-by-side and over-under, and that says red cyan, but there's red green and red blue and amber. I forget what goes with amber. And Inverse-IN, thank you. Okay, so this is emerging. There are a couple of 3D clubs here in LA producing content in 3D. So, in closing, almost, content creation side, 3D is going to transition from being a special effect to being a component of the storytelling language. On the distribution side, standardization will occur, or else everyone knows if it doesn't occur, it's an impediment to adoption. So that's going to happen. And as I mentioned, the consumers need to have a pleasant buying experience as well as a viewing experience, or else the market's going to be stunted. So just the safety caveat here, if consumers decide that they want 3D experiences outside the theater, then it will catch on. If not, everyone expects it to be at least a very successful niche market. So the jury is still out. We'll know in the next 1 to 2 years where it's going. Questions to think about. What is the real impact of putting 3D in the home? And I'm not concerned about people wearing the glasses and looking around. That's just going to become second nature, and some of us wear glasses all the time. The question is, how will that impact other things going on in the house, and will it have a lifestyle impact? Will people decide that those glasses are actually a fashion statement? Okay, how do you explain 3D to the consumer? I've talked about it to death. How do you use it as part of the storytelling experience? From 2 or 3 days ago, what's the impact of higher ticket prices and/or shorter release windows? I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, which is more important? Because we talked about the safety side of 3D and the health aspect of it. Do you warn consumers, or do you educate the creative community to say, show some restraint? Or is it some balance? It's an open issue. I'm just throwing it out there. And that's it. Good.